Hey guys, hope you're doing well. If you could, please like and subscribe to this video if you're into this sort of thing. I don't know who isn't curious about near-death experiences, but that's what this one is about. Albert Hiem was a Swiss geologist, and in the 1800s, he gave a lecture concerning near-death experiences. He experienced an NDE himself, which I assume is what got him interested in the topic. If you're interested in the topic, I also have two others on my channel. One is an unknown near-death experience called the Terror and Wonder of a near-death experience, and the other one is probably one of the, if not the earliest account of a near-death experience, written by Plato, actually. That one is called Plato's Myth of Heaven, Hell, and Reincarnation. So check those out if you're interested. So this one, I believe in 1892, he gave this lecture in which he examined different experiences of mountain climbers. Not just mountain climbers, but other people who had survived either significant falls or life and death situations. Through these accounts, Hiem identified common elements of near-death experiences, such as a life review, feelings of peace, and the perception of time slowing down. Really fascinating stuff. It's translated into English, so just bear with it here a little bit. I think you'll find it really fascinating.
In presenting to the readers of the yearbook, a little study of death from falls in mountains, I do not intend to set forth a series of horror stories and describe their misery, nor to give a listing of such misfortunes. Rather, let us collect ourselves in order to study scientifically even a dreadful event in its manifestations. Sometimes it loses some of its ugliness because of this, sometimes it is horrific for the survivors but quite different for the victims themselves. High interest, that is the question: what kind of feelings did the suddenly injured person have in the last few seconds of his life? One often has terrible ideas about this. One imagines the extreme despair, the greatest pain, the most terrible pain, and then tries to read fear distortions in the faces of the disfigured dead. But it's not like that. Whether it is a fall over a rock face, a fall over ice and snow, a fall with an avalanche or in a waterfall is not of major importance. Furthermore, the subjective sensation of a man falling to his death is the same whether he falls from the scaffolding of a house or from a cliff, and one who has been run over by a chariot or hit by a machine, even the drowning one and the one falling in battle on the field of battle, it can be proved, feels in a very similar way and looks death in the face with similar feelings. But the dead can no longer tell us what he felt. How can we find out more about it? Those who have experienced such misfortunes, but still narrowly escaped death, have already felt the same as those who remained dead. This can especially be assumed in all those cases where unconsciousness has set in. To the sensation, unconsciousness and death are exactly the same. The one who never recovers from unconsciousness and dies can tell us no more. The one who awakens as if from death and can tell us exactly how dying from sudden misfortune is felt. He then dies at least twice in his life. The material on which I base my presentation comes from the following sources. In mountaineering and other literature we occasionally, though seldom, come across related narratives. In the Hamburg Lazarethan of the war year 1870, as well as on various later occasions, I questioned war-wounded people. Several doctors who had a lot to do with victims were able to tell me about their statements. I have researched several bricklayers and roofers who have fallen from scaffolding and roofs, workers in mines, on railway lines, etc. who have had half an accident. A large number of eelpoolers, who fell without losing their lives, were able to give me precise information. Those who were thrown away by the airstrikes and lost consciousness during the Elm landslide told me about their experiences. I also received detailed reports from some club members who fell and were rescued by 3 colleagues, etc. A fisherman who had been torn deep underwater when the Tug bank collapsed told me about his experiences. From the Monkenstein railway accident we have some good descriptions of those who barely escaped their lives, for example a locomotive driver, some passengers etc. But this has caused me not to miss an opportunity to write such notes for more than 25 years. Have been my own experiences. In the great majority of those who have had an accident, probably 95%, the symptoms are absolutely the same, regardless of their level of education, but they are felt slightly differently. Almost everyone enters into the same mental state in the face of sudden, accidental death, and quite a different state than that of a less sudden death. It can be briefly characterized as follows. No pain is felt, just as little paralyzing shock as it can appear in the case of minor danger, breakout of fire, etc. No fear, no trace of despair, no pain, rather calm seriousness, deep resignation, dominating mental security and speed. The thought activity is enormous, probably increased to 100-fold speed or intensity. The circumstances and the eventualities of the outcome are objectively clearly surveyed far away, no confusion occurs. The time seems very extended. You act quickly and think correctly. In numerous cases, there is a sudden look back into one's entire past. Finally, the falling often hears beautiful music and then falls into a glorious blue sky with rose-colored clouds. Then consciousness fades away painlessly, usually at the moment when the bangs hit, which is at best heard, never painfully felt. Of the senses, hearing is probably the last to die out. Without getting involved in many individual stories, the most important points should be emphasized in more detail. No pain. The warriors who were hit by bullets all told me that they didn't feel the bullet entering. They only became aware of it when a limb no longer wanted to move or they saw the blood flow. People who have fallen don't notice anything when their limbs break until they want to get up and then see with their eyes that a limb is hanging powerless and dangling. A 16-year-old Italian who fell from the scaffolding and suffered a fractured skull and collarbone told me that it only made a sound but didn't hurt at all, and that he could walk to the hospital himself. When, as a 16-year-old boy, I was run over by a cart with a shy horse, I could hear the cracking noise and count that I had broken a very large, 4 medium-sized and 2 smaller bones, and I immediately told the examining doctor, but whether I had broken legs or arms I did not feel until, when they picked me up, I saw that the left leg was hanging with the foot turned backwards and the knee was up. Pain was only felt after about an hour. If a leg or an arm is crushed by a falling rock in the mountains, you can see which limb is injured before you feel anything. When I fell on the Sontis in 1872, I only heard the blows that wounded my head and back, I felt no pain. It would be easy to cite hundreds of examples, all of which prove that in the event of a sudden, serious accident, there is initially no pain, no doubt as a result of the enormous mental excitement, which has a similar effect to hypnosis, and the feeling of pain in the brain from all the other thoughts that intrude leaves no room at all. Anxiety paralysis does not set in, thought activity appears enormously increased, the time lengthened in the same proportion. The verdict remains clearly objective, and as far as the external circumstances permit, the person who falls remains capable of acting at lightning speed. A few explanatory and at the same time proving examples, selected from numerous. Engineer Gossett drove from the Haute Cry to Tal with an avalanche. He reports very precisely on all the individual phenomena of this dreadful journey down the valley. One reads his words, for example, printed in J. Coas, Die Leunen der Schweizer Alpen, 1881, p. 77 etc., and one will find the features indicated they didn't want to enter the spot and recognized the danger first. The tear to separate the avalanche had developed, an anxious silence followed, it lasted only a few seconds and was then interrupted by Bennon's voice, "We are all lost." His words were slow and solemn. They were his last words. I turned to Bennon to see if he was also pushing the alpenstock into the snow. To my astonishment he turned around, looked down into his towel and spread out both arms. Benon made no involuntary or desperate efforts, he saw too clearly their futility, he solemnly approached death. In cases where a saving deed is possible, it is done. From probably 30 examples that I have noted, I only want to remind you of two. When 3 of a troop broke off the ridge of the Pipalo with a gun, Hansgrass threw himself into the abyss on the other side of the ridge as a counterweight. All of them got stuck on the rope over the ridge on both sides and were saved. When on the Matterhorn in 1877 Branscombe saw the Englishman in front of him climbing the ropes fixed in the rock fall, he took the rope that connected him to it in his teeth and then held on to the rock rope with both hands, so that he with the rope in his teeth stopped the fall of the Englishman, with his head that of the leader in front who had been torn away. Even children from the age of 2 and up often save themselves in complicated situations by an astonishingly rapid, purposeful intervention. I have found 3 remarkable instances of this kind. Certainly it is not correct to speak in such cases of a quite unusual presence of mind as a personal quality of the person concerned. On the contrary, numerous examples can prove that the same person who is able to perform a remarkable act of the kind in the face of death becomes terribly paralyzed by some less dangerous event, and is unable to do anything, or even the wrong thing to do at the highest degree of surprise. Presence of mind increases, at lesser degrees it tends to paralyze in many. I have to let go. If I just let go, I fall on my back and the wheels run over my legs in front. Then at least a fracture of the kneecap or the tibia is inevitable and I am badly injured. If I can turn so that I fall on my stomach, the wheels go over the backs of my legs. If I then tense the muscles there, it is a protective cushion for the bones. The pressure of the road is less likely to break a bone than the pressure of a wheel. If I turn to the left when letting go, I might be able to pull my left leg back sufficiently, but turning to the right would have brought both my legs under the car given the shape of the car. I know quite clearly that only after this lightning fast, in all individual parts quite clearly, I had to let myself fall, as the reflection that had remained fixed and imprinted in my brain, turned me to the left with a jerk of my arm, swung my left leg out vigorously and immediately tensed my leg muscles to the utmost. The wheel went through the hollow of my right knee, and I got away with a slight bruise. Some others have told me similar stories. That is not an admirable presence of mind, but it is also not a mere reflex movement. Rather, it is a reflection such as appears of necessity in the moment of extreme excitement in the human mind, which is extremely strained by fright. A classic account of the subjective feelings of a sudden accident is that of a theology student who broke into the Monkenstein Bridge on June 14, 1891. At the same time, it shows how the essential phenomena in accidents of various kinds are similar. Unfortunately, I could not find out its name. I take the following from the Swiss Protestant Journal of June 20, 1891. The journey went at the fastest pace, but very irregularly and jerkily, so that a conversation was impossible. The 2 locomotives did not work well together and the rear cars had to pay for it. As a result, the sense of security was not great. At first I didn't take it so seriously when suddenly at the Bursbrook there was a stronger shock than any previous one. But at the same moment the train stood still in the middle of the fastest run. The impact threw the occupants to the ceiling. I sat backwards and couldn't see what was going on. The mighty, metal-hard thunder that rang out in front made me suspect a collision. I opened the door and wanted to leave, but at the same moment the following car rose up and threatened to fall on me. I turned back to my seat and wanted to call out to my neighbor at the window, out the window. I bit my tongue hard and closed my mouth. In the shortest possible time the most horrible descent that one can imagine took place. I clung convulsively to my seat. Arms and legs functioned in an exemplary manner, each instinctively taking care of itself, performing with lightning speed the reflexes and parrying movements dictated by the oncoming boards, poles, benches. A whole flood of thoughts meanwhile had time to flow through the brain in a clear way. The next push will bring you grim death, they said. A series of pictures showed me in rapid succession all the beauty and love that I experience in this world, and in between the sermon sounded like a powerful melody, which I had heard from Herr Obersthelfer that morning: God is omnipotent, heaven and earth are in his hands, we must keep still to his will. Infinite calm came over me at this thought, in the midst of all the terrible turmoil. Twice more the carriage was thrown up, then the front part suddenly went straight down into the burrs, and the rear part with me was thrown sideways over the dam down into the burrs. The carriage was shattered. I lay wedged and pressed under a heap of boards and benches and awaited the next carriage on my head. Then it suddenly became quiet. The banging stopped. Hot water trickled down from his forehead, but without pain. The blood loss was a relief. There are numerous reports of people who have fallen. A North Bohemian postmaster who fell 22 meters over a rock face as an 8-year-old boy in 1871 reports to me. I felt absolutely no unpleasant feeling during the fall. I clearly remember rolling over 3 or 4 times in the air. I only had one concern: I might lose my pocket knife, which my father had just given me. Despite the severe concussion and numerous skin abrasions I sustained, I can only reiterate that the fall itself did not cause me the slightest discomfort, pain, or frightening sensation. I no longer felt that I was being noticed. I must have lost consciousness before then. Our clubmate J. Sigrist, who fell backwards from the top of the kapstock, reports: the fall, which took place backwards, was not at all, as one usually believes, accompanied by the frightening feeling that one often has in dreams. On the contrary, I thought I was being carried down in the most pleasant way, floating, and had the fullest awareness during the event. I surveyed my situation and the future of my family, which I held safe with insurance, without pain and without anxiety, and did so with a speed that would otherwise never be possible. There was no trace of losing my breath, as people often claim, and it was only the strongest impact down on the snow-covered ledge that painlessly knocked me out. I did not feel the previous abrasions on my head and limbs. I could not think of an easier, more beautiful way of dying. The reawakening, however, brought other feelings. Almost all reports that have been given to me by word of mouth, as well as the stories by Whymper, Tyndall, etc., are very similar. The moment at which unconsciousness occurs in the fall varies greatly, not so much according to the individual events as according to the personalities. Ilpala often assured me that one of them would lose consciousness right at the beginning of the fall and afterwards could not tell anything more about what happened, but most of the others would only lose consciousness after a violent impact. Even rarer are those cases in which the person who falls takes correct action without actually losing consciousness, e.g. wades from the collapsed bridge to the bank and climbs out, etc., without having the slightest memory of the event and his actions afterwards. Under certain circumstances, therefore, it can only erase the memory for a few seconds instead of the entire consciousness. During a fall itself, the person who falls usually remains still. A cry of fear has hardly ever been observed. I may still relate my own experience of the sensations experienced during a fall, because I can give a more complete picture of it than what others have told me orally or in writing. In 1871, a group of good mountaineers descended from the blue snow on the Sontis towards the Sealp, while there was still quite a lot of snow. I went ahead. Above the Fielalp, at about 1,800 meters, we came to the upper edge of a steep snowy couloir, which ran obliquely between two rocky outcrops clearly drawn on sheet 240 of the Siegfried Atlas. The others hesitated. I immediately went down standing. It was very quick. The draft wanted to take my hat off. Instead of letting him go, I made the mistake of wanting to hold him quickly. This movement made me fall. Now I could no longer control my fall. I drifted at lightning speed to the rocky outcrop on the left, bounced up the ledge, then drove on my back, head down, over the rock and finally flew about 20 meters freely through the air. As soon as I fell, I realized that I must now be thrown against the rock and awaited the impact. I dug into the snow with my clawed fingers to slow down, tearing all my fingertips bloody without feeling any pain. I clearly heard the banging of my head and back on each corner of the rock, and I heard the thud as I fell down below. But I only felt pain after about an hour. During the fall, the aforesaid flood of thoughts set in. What I thought and felt in 5 to 10 seconds cannot be told in 10 times as many minutes. All thoughts and ideas were coherent and very clear, not dreamily blurred. At first I overlooked the possibilities of my destiny and said to myself, the rocky outcrop over which I shall soon be thrown obviously falls down as a steep wall, because it covered the ground below from my view. It all depends on whether there is still snow under the rock face. If this is the case, the snow will have melted off the wall and form an edge. If I fall on the edge of the snow I can escape with my life, but if there is no more snow at the bottom I will undoubtedly fall down into rubble, and then at this rate of fall death is quite inevitable. If I'm not dead and unconscious down there, I have to immediately reach for the small bottle of vinegar ether that I didn't put in my knapsack pharmacy when I left on the Sontis, but just put it in my vest pocket, and put a few drops on my tongue. I don't want to let go of the cane, maybe it can still be of use to me. I then held it firmly in my hand. I thought of taking my glasses off and throwing them away so that the splinters wouldn't hurt my eyes, but I was thrown so badly that I couldn't even move my hands to do it. Another group of thoughts and ideas concerned the consequences of my fall for those behind me. I told myself that when I arrived at the bottom, regardless of whether I was badly injured or not, I had to call out with all my might, whenever possible. It didn't do anything to me. With my companions, including my brother and 3 friends, out of terror they could pull themselves together enough to even manage the rather difficult descent down to me. That in any case I could not hold my inaugural lecture as a private lecturer, which had been announced for 5 days later. I ignored the news of my death reaching my family and comforted them in my thoughts. Then, as if on a stage from a distance, I saw my whole past life play out in numerous pictures. I saw myself as the main character playing. Everything was as if transfigured by a heavenly light, and everything was beautiful and without pain, without fear, without pain. The memory of very sad experiences was also clear, but not sad. No fight and quarrel, even the fight had become love. Sublime and reconciling thoughts dominated and connected the individual images, and a divine stillness passed through my soul like glorious music. More and more I was surrounded by a wonderful blue sky with rosy and especially with delicate violet clouds. I floated painlessly and gently out into them, while I saw that I was now flying freely through the air and that there was still a snow field below me. Objective observation, thinking, and subjective feeling went on simultaneously. Then I heard my thud and my fall was over. At that moment I felt a black object scurrying past my eyes, and I called out 3 or 4 times in succession with all my might. It didn't do anything to me. I took some of the vinegar ether, I grabbed my glasses, which were intact lying in the snow beside me, I felt my back and my limbs to make sure I hadn't broken any bones. Then I saw my companions slowly appearing, step by step, in the snowy couloir, already very close to me behind the rock over which I had flown. I couldn't understand that they were so far along. But they said I probably hadn't called an answer for half an hour. Only then did I realize that I had lost consciousness when I hit it. Half an hour was cut out of every activity of the senses and of every feeling and thought. The black object was the disappearance of unconsciousness, which evidently appeared a fraction of a second later for the eye than for the sensitive brain. And without even noticing the interruption, the thoughts and activities had afterwards continued exactly where they had been interrupted before. In between there was an absolute subjective nothingness. But I only felt the beautiful, heavenly images as long as I was still flying through the air and could see and think. With the unconsciousness on impact, they too were suddenly wiped away and didn't continue afterwards. I was still able to walk after my friend Andreas Anton Dorig put me on my feet. The bruised pain in my back and the headache snatched many a cry from me, until I was lying on the Megalsalp, wrapped in ice packs. However, I held my inaugural lecture at the previously set time. Certainly it is incomparably more painful for the subjective feeling of the moment and for the memory to see another fall than to fall oneself. Countless stories testify to this. Often the spectators are paralyzed to the point of inability and tremble in body and soul, or even suffer permanent damage from the shock, while the person who has fallen, if he is not seriously injured, has completely overcome the shock and pain. A severe headache and great tiredness soon follow as a later reaction. I've seen others fall several times, without a fatal outcome. But those memories are always scary. I even have to testify that the memory of the fall of a cow still haunts me with embarrassment, while my own misfortunes are inscribed in memory only in a pleasant transfiguration, without anguish and without pain, just as they were actually felt. Even an unpleasant thrill, like on a high swinging swing, does not occur when you fall in danger of death. After the newspapers had brought some notes on my lecture held in the section Uto, I received a whole series of letters from accident victims from Hungary, Bohemia, Germany, and England, all of which confirm my results already obtained from numerous narratives: clear, very rapid thinking without fear, without pain, without suffering. Death by falling only becomes terrible when it does not occur quickly, when the person who has fallen regains consciousness and then suffers for hours, days, or even weeks before they slowly die. However, I did not want to talk about these cases here. We have come to the conclusion that death by falling is subjectively a beautiful death. If there is no previous illness, it occurs with a clear consciousness, with increased activity of the senses and thoughts, without fear and without pain. Our friends who fell dead in the mountains have seen their own past in transfiguration at the last moment. They still thought of theirs lovingly, they were already above physical pain, pure great thoughts, heavenly music, the feeling of peace and reconciliation dominated them, they fell into a blue and rosy, wonderful sky so gently, so softly, so blissful, and then suddenly everything was quiet. Unconsciousness comes on suddenly, without torment, it itself contains no torment, and in this state a second and a millennium are exactly the same length and the same short, they are nothing to us. Death can no longer cause any change for the unconscious, absolute calm, painless extinction remain unchanged. One could now attempt to explain these phenomena. Depending on whether one starts from a physiological or a philosophical standpoint, the explanation may turn out very differently and lead to very different further assumptions. I deliberately do not enter this uncertain territory. I wanted to do no more than merely show the actual phenomena of this enormous increase in life that the human spirit offers in death by falling, and I do not want to leave the ground of direct observation. For the bereaved, such deaths are terrible and harsh. However, when I once shared my conviction and my observations of this kind with a mother whose two excellent sons had fallen to their deaths, she found solace in it. She now knew, death was a beautiful death for the fallen. Reconciliation and blessed peace was the last sensation with which they bid farewell to the world and, in a way, fell into their heaven. Let us, dear club comrades, lay a wreath in spirit on the graves of the fallen. Note from the editor: we have nothing personal to add to the above very interesting remarks, shall we say, fortunately. They only give us cause for one comment. The case of Branscombe is presented above as it appears to Mr. Hiem after his thorough inquiries. However, it must not be concealed that the opposing party, both gentleman and guide, has never admitted the fact itself in this form.